I'm really enjoying working in this conference. It's, I get to know just about everybody in it, which is really nice. But we as pastors never get to worship or go to church with our colleagues. It just doesn't ever happen. So it's kind of fun seeing everybody dressed up and, looking their best, because we don't when we get together at other places. So thanks for coming down and being part of that. I think Mark Weir, our conference president, makes sure every church gets some visit from the conference at one point every year. And again, that's new for me too. I've not seen that before. All right, I have a message I've been looking forward to sharing for a while. And we're going to go to Colossians chapter 3, and I'm going to read a few verses. I'm using Colossians as the Bible oomph for what I'm trying to say today. It's not going to be a lot of scripture in the message today, but Colossians has informed the stories I'm sharing, how I share the stories, the way they come together. So I'm going to start off here with Colossians 3 and verse 2. Where Paul just says very clearly, set your mind on things that are above rather than the things that are here on earth. A really simple instruction to Jesus Christ followers. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to want your attention. They are not your priority. Instead, focus on things above rather than the things below. Now, Colossians is like a lot of the letters that Paul would write. He would often start off explaining the gospel. So Ephesians, we've been doing in our Sabbath school lesson. That's a letter that definitely follows this pattern. Colossians has an amazing description of what Christ does for his children. Chapters 1 and 2 is just a beautiful description of what grace is and what the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of Jesus Christ means to us. And Paul puts it beautifully. Romans is probably a more expansive version of that. If you want the theology of grace, the theology of salvation, Paul shares it over and over again. But at some point in his letters, he gets to a point where he makes a little turn and he moves from describing what salvation is and says, so because of what Jesus has done, then this is how we ought to live. Now, a lot of people will quote Paul from the second part of Romans, the second part of Colossians, the second part of Ephesians, Galatians, where there's a lot of how you should live. But never forget that before Paul gives all of that, he gives a great description of what it is that Jesus has done. The best transition verse is in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, in other words, because of everything you've just heard that I've just written, therefore offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. Because Jesus has done that for you. It's a mutual thing. So Colossians, though, is just, if you want a beautiful description of salvation, Colossians 1 and 2. And if it's not obvious to you, dig a little deeper, and there's some amazing things that are going on there. But I'm assuming you've heard the gospel. And so now today's message is about, okay, how do we live in response to what Jesus has done? Well, first of all, dwell on things above rather than the things below. Even the things that happen around you, dwell on those things the way Jesus would dwell on those things. Let him be your light, your guide, your instruction right there. And then verse 3, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ. So when it says that you've died, Paul's not predicting, Seventh-day Adventist churches in the year 2023. Man, you guys are dead. No, that's not what he's saying. He's talking about your baptism, about your acceptance of Jesus. So I've shared this before, and I'll share it a few times, because I want us to understand this. When you're baptized, there's nothing magical about the water. We don't pray over the water and ask the water to bless your baptism. Water is just an easier version of 6 feet of dirt. So when you are baptized, you you die to your old life. You are buried to your old life. And then, just as Jesus was died and resurrected, you then come up out of the water. And now you are a new creature in Christ. That's kind of a cliche. We say these things. This is where we get it from. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ. So when you die, you're actually participating in Jesus Christ's death. He gets the nails, you get the water. It's a really good deal. But you are buried to your old life and you resurrect to your new life. Now, all of us probably know some Christians that were buried alive. And they come back up the same person. And when you're baptized young, you don't always completely understand what you're doing. It's kind of a ritual at that point. And I understand that. There's room and place for ritual. But you still got to come to that point where you give yourself over to Jesus and let him live through you. And that's a promise. That's not like a test. Sometimes we view it as a test. But it's a promise. Jesus is going to live through you. And then the final verse I want to read right now. When Christ, who is your life, when he is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. You and Jesus are a partner now. You get to live together, work together, operate this world and this life together. And that's what he has offered for you. Now, he did the first part. He did all of that before you were even a twinkle in anybody's eye. But having done that, you get the chance to accept what Jesus has done for you. Sadly, though, life doesn't always work out the way we want it to. And we try and live with Jesus, but a lot of that self stuff starts creeping in. I have discovered that I now am from South Dakota. I know you probably don't think that yet, but I am from South, and here's how I know. Almost 2 weeks ago, I found myself in Sioux Falls. And, whoa. Don't know what that means when the pulpit starts falling apart. I was in Sioux Falls, and Forrest was there, and I'd gone from Aberdeen, Huron, and around. I thought, well, this is a great chance. I hadn't seen Forrest in Sioux Falls yet, and he'd been there a while. And when I got to Sioux Falls, I went to the hospital, and I couldn't find anywhere to park. I'd forgotten what it's like to go somewhere and not be able to find somewhere to park. South Dakota is usually awesome for that. Here, you can go to Walmart at the busiest time ever, and there's still twice as many parking spaces as cars. That is fantastic. I love that. And I have got used to that really quickly. So when I went to the hospital in Sioux Falls, I'm going up and up and up around this multi-story parking lot, and there's no spaces, none. And I'm getting a little agitated by that. The stress level in me is beginning to rise. This is how I know I'm from here now, because that didn't used to affect my stress level. I just took that for granted. It's going to take 40 minutes to drive there, 30 minutes to find a space. So that's just how life is. Well, they have not reserved a space for me? Well, it turns out they had. As I got near the elevator near the top, there was 2 empty spaces there. And I'm like, it's got to be reserved for a doctor or, somebody. And it said on there, reserved for clergy. Now, when I was a young pastor, that used to happen a lot. Every hospital would have clergy parking. But since you can get ordained on the internet now, most clergy parking has gone away. Most hospitals do not have clergy parking. But here in Sioux Falls, there's clergy parking. And I park, I make my way through an elevator, a walkway across something. I really felt like I was in the big city. This is Sodom and Gomorrah, I tell you. This was just like, whoa, I haven't been around this many people for a long time. And I go through, and this hospital is it's a maze. And there's a pharmacy and a cafeteria and different departments and corridors. And I'm just looking for an atrium, a lobby with somebody sitting there so that I can do my thing. Say the name of the person I want to visit, they'll tell me where they are, and I'll go and find that space. So I couldn't find any of that. I was getting so lost and feeling completely discombobulated, feeling very South Dakotan. I don't know if this is how you feel when you go to the big city, but I was, Pierre is a small town. You might not know that, but it was weird for me. And I saw it on the directions, chapel. And I thought, I'll go to the chapel. And if there's a chaplain there, they'll help me out. And they probably would. They're like pastors. They got nothing to do. And so they would be happy to take me where I needed to go. So I'm going through there, and my phone rings. And while my phone rings, I'm like, I'm too stressed for the phone right now. But I was like, no, I should pick up. And forgive me for dropping names, but it was Melody. And we were connecting over some care issues for your house. And then Melody found out I was also in Sioux Falls, and I thought she was coming. I was very confused. And I pick up the phone, and I'm in a hospital. So I go, hello, really. And Melody goes, are you okay? And I go, no, really, I'm fine. She says, you don't sound okay. I'm just trying to be polite. I'm South Dakotan now, and I don't want to disturb anybody around me. And so I'm sitting on the back wall, and we come out, and I find out I'm in the wrong hospital. It never occurred to me that a town in South Dakota might have more than one hospital. Did not cross my mind. So I'm in the wrong hospital, and Melody's telling me where I actually need to go. Saved me a lot of time. And after a while, we hang up, and then the person who's sitting in front of me, he turns around and he gives me directions to the hospital I need to go to. He had maybe been doing some eavesdropping, listening to our conversations. I said, thank you. I'm from out of town, and this is just way too big a city for me, and I'm confused. And I said, you give me these instructions, but I'll never find that. Can I pull up on my phone and we'll hit the right hospital, and then that will take me? And he helped me with that, and that was great. And I said, I'm a pastor. I'm visiting somebody from my church. He goes, yeah, I heard that. And then he says this, I could really use some prayer. Now, he had crutches, and he was there for an appointment which had got canceled, and he was lingering, hoping to get an appointment later in the day. And it just suddenly looked like his life wasn't going very well, and he was, he says, I could use all the prayer I can get. Now, this was not my finest pastor moment, because I know what a pastor is supposed to do in that moment. I know what any Christian is supposed to do in that moment. But I was really scared that I wasn't going to find my car again. My mind was like, okay, now I've got to retrace my steps and find my car. There's going to be no signs to my car. I've got to remember where, and it was a maze in that hospital. It all looked the same but different. And so I'm like, I think I'm just going over and over in my head to make sure I can go back the right way. And here's a guy who says, really use some prayer. And I very quickly, prayer is good. God bless you. Did my little preacher thing. And then I turned and I followed the voices in my head. Where's your car? Where's your car? Where's your car? And I found it. And I sat in the car and I thought, boy, I blew that one. Man, God, I really blew that one. Suddenly it began, I was supposed to pray with the guy. Maybe we could have made a connection. I could have given him my card. I could have become his pastor. This is how stories like this happen. But man, I missed that. So I put my car engine on, put it in reverse, got a little screen there, tiny little spaces, still big South Dakota trucks. And I work my way out, and I'm driving down, and I find the heart hospital. Apparently there's more than one heart hospital in South Dakota. That eventually found Forest. You have no idea how long that took. Not as long as it took you to get there. I'm not complaining. But when I got to the hospital and found another space, I'm like, I blew it again. I mean, the first time I realized I blew it, I mean, I didn't think I could find him again, but I didn't even try. Man, I've really blown this. God, I'm ready. See, here's the thing. I thought I was being a really good pastor that day. I was in Sioux Falls. Do you know how far Sioux Falls is from here? Some of you do know, because you were there that same day. There were a lot of us in Sioux Falls that day. It's far. And I was like, I'm a good pastor today. But I totally blew it. I know I'm supposed to think on things above. But I was agitated, nervous. Even there was a little fear in me that I wasn't going to get where I needed to go and do what I needed to do. And it wasn't working easily. And I was anxious. Anxious is the right word. And I knew how to calm myself, but I had to do all those things. And in worrying about me, I totally missed this divine appointment with one of God's children who wasn't having a good day, who probably hasn't been to church much lately, but suddenly heard a pastor behind him, lost and needing directions. And that pastor just missed it. Missed it. So when you're on your knees, just pray for the guy in Sioux Falls Hospital with crutches. He's getting a lot of prayer from me now. And maybe, I don't know, God can put that back together again. I mean, he really can. I don't think someone's salvation depends on me. My theology won't let me do that, because that's really scary for the rest of the world. Imagine going to heaven and someone's down there go, oh, I forgot to tell them. Oh, well, bye. And, going off to a wonderful eternity. That doesn't work for me that way. I didn't pray with him. I didn't establish contact. I felt I needed prayer. I needed to be tended to right there. But sometimes tending to somebody else is exactly what takes your anxiety away. Chapter 3 then goes on, and it talks about things you shouldn't do. Galatians calls them lusts of the flesh. And then it goes into a passage of just how to trust God and let God lead your life. The end of chapter 3 is beautiful. And I will encourage you to read it. But instead of reading it this morning, I'm going to tell you another story of God at work. Because when you do start to follow him, even when you blow it, God can still use you, guide you, and lead you. I was in the airport in Nashville. I don't know if you've been to the airport in Nashville. Some airports are monuments. They are incredible structures, not Nashville. A very mediocre airport. It's got a guitar in a glass case, and that's how you know it's Nashville. Other than that, you wouldn't have any idea. It was between 12 and 12:30, early afternoon. And I had a 6:30 in the evening flight. It was a time in my life where I was flying quite a bit. So I went up to the United check-in area, and I said, you've got a 1:30 flight to Denver there. I was going to go Denver, L.A., up to San Luis Obispo where I lived. I had 3 planes to go on. I said, you've got a 1:30 flight to Denver. I'm booked on the 6:30 flight to Denver. Is there any chance I can get on the 1:30 one? Yeah, probably. It's not full. There's a good chance you can get on it, but I will check you in on the 6:30 flight to get you through security, then go to the gate of the 1:30 flight, and they'll make the change if they can do it. So that's what I did. Looked at the guitar. It was played by someone I never heard of, because country music and me don't know a lot about each other. And I got to the gate, and I went up, and I said, I'd really like to get on this flight. She says, well, even if you get on this flight, I'm not sure you'll get home any quicker. I'm like, I didn't want to say anything, but I'd rather wait in Denver and LA than Nashville. So if you could get me on, I'd like to take this flight. She goes, yeah, we can do it. She takes my boarding pass, gives me another one, and I sit down in the waiting area. And then I hear my name on the tannoy system, which for all the times I've flown, I'd never heard my name in an airport, and it made me feel pretty good. I had to go up. They were calling me back up to the desk. And when I went there, I wasn't talking to the nice lady with the United uniform on. It was a guy with a sweatshirt, sweatpants, knee pads. It looks like he was putting cargo on the plane, the luggage on the plane, not people. He says, Mr. Easter? I go, yes. He says, can I see your boarding pass? I give him my boarding pass. He says, yeah, that's not going to work. And he just tears it up. Now, I've been a Christian for a long time. But sometimes when people do things, I get a little agitated with them. And I was preparing my speech to this guy for taking away my boarding pass, because you need a boarding pass in an airport. You do. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. He says, yeah, he says, we've decided to put you in first class. And all of a sudden, my bad thoughts went away. This is great. Thank you. I like first class. If you fly United enough and they got some empty seats, they'll put you there. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, I have some praise in me. I like, those bigger seats. It's good stuff. So I got a gold boarding pass and took my seat, and when they said that the first class people could board, I'm like, oh, that's me. And so I went on, and I was one of the last of the first class to get on, and it was a little plane. The back of the plane where they put the cattle, they had 2 seats and 2 seats. But where we were, it had 1 seat and 2 seats, because they were bigger. And they looked nice. And I was going to be on the second one, on the second row by the window. I like the window. But my seatmate was already there sorting himself out, and he was a big guy. I mean, I was like, boy, it's good you're in first class, because you would not fit where I'm used to sitting. He's a big guy, big, tall, and he's chatting to everybody. He's Mr. Charisma, and he's like, oh, I want to come by. Yeah, come by. He gets out of the way. Oh, no, I don't shuffle in like this. I walk in like this, because there's space there. And I sit down, and I get out a thick spiritual book. And I'm getting ready just to lean up against the window. I'm just not in the mood for talking to anybody. I'm just going to read my thick spiritual book. And my seatmate wasn't going to disturb me, because he suddenly realized that he found the 2 flight attendants on the plane very attractive. And so he was doing what guys like this do when they find some attractive people. I'd never seen anyone behave like this up close. It was odd, to be honest. And they looked like they wanted nothing to do with him, but he was not bothered by that. He was going to power through that moment. But they eventually went down to the back of the plane, and he leans over to me and he goes, whoa, they're all right. And he's like, that first one, number 1 and number 2. Number 1 looks pretty. Number 2, she's got a lot of mileage on her, if you know what I mean. And I just never know how to respond to that. And we get chatting, and the inevitable question comes. First of all, he's like, do you live in Nashville, or are you going home? I'm going home. He says, yeah, me too. But he can't stop talking. So he says, what do you do in San Luis Obispo? Now, I got to tell you, I love these moments when people don't know they've been talking to a preacher, and they act themselves, and then they find out I'm a preacher. I got to tell you, there's been a few times that's happened in my life, and I take a little joy out of those moments. So I was going to enjoy this one. because he'd been quite crude about these women. And he said, so what do you do there in San Luis Obispo? So I said, well, I'm a preacher. I would say pasta, but no, everyone thinks I'm calling myself some Italian food. So I forget the pasta word, and I go with preacher. I said, I'm a preacher. And he goes, wow. So they're both from me then, huh? That's how he responded. He wasn't a bit bothered that he was sitting next to a preacher. Didn't faze him at all. So then he said, and this is what I did not want to hear. This is why I was reading a big, thick spiritual book. This is why I didn't want to talk to anybody. He said, so I suppose you've got to get home tonight to go do your sermon tomorrow. You see, I was on an airplane on the Holy Sabbath day. It's something I try to avoid doing. When I was a little kid, and I was a missionary's kid, there were 2 flights into our country. One was on Wednesday, and one was on Sabbath. And all the missionaries took the Wednesday flight, always. But when people came from the GC to visit and come through, they would maybe come in on the Wednesday and leave on the Sabbath, or come in on the Sabbath and leave on the Wednesday. And now I know that they had families and were away half the year, and they didn't need to spend a whole week there. But as a little kid, it really bothered me that these GC people were flying in and out on Sabbath. I couldn't process that in my head. So I know people, and if you fly on Sabbath, and this is not a sermon about that today. It's just that I had tried to avoid it. The one time I'd done it before, I'd spoken at a graduation on Friday evening in Chicago, and I was speaking at a graduation on the Sunday morning in Washington State outside Portland on the Sunday. And the day in between was Sabbath, so I booked a flight, but when I got on it, the pilot said, our plane's not working. We're going to have to find you another plane. And by the time I took off from Chicago, the sun had gone down, and it wasn't Sabbath anymore. I'm like, well done. Very good. Nice move. And when I booked my 6:30 flight, I knew there was a 1:30 flight, but it was February in Nashville, and by 6:30, the sun would have gone down. So I knew that. But I'd been at a spiritual conference. It wasn't an Adventist one, so they were getting pastors home for their church on Sunday. But I'd gone to it, and it had finished a little early, and somebody had given me a ride to the airport, and I was there at 12:30, and I just wanted to go home. If I'm going to be in the airport anyway, I'm going. So I'm sitting on this plane next to this guy trying it on with these women, saying, so I guess you got to go home tomorrow so that you can preach tomorrow. And I go, oh boy, okay, here we go, God. I said, well, actually, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, and we go to church on Saturday. And I waited for judgment to fall. But this is the beautiful thing about heathen people. They're a lot less judgmental. And he goes, so you're done then? I go, yeah, I'm done. It's like, good for you. Good for you. He said, who preached you? Someone preached. I had elders there, they preached. He said, well, good for you. You can go home and relax. You don't even have to work for another 6 days. That's wonderful. That's really cool. And then that was it. And the women come back, and he's talking to them, and we're taking off, and they have to belt up within 6 feet of him. They can't get away from him, and he powers through, and in the end, they're becoming friends. I don't know how he did it. It's a gift some men have that I do not, and that's okay. I'm not seeking it, but he did it, and they were becoming friends, and they were chatting. But when we got to 10,000 feet, they got up, gave us our drinks, went down to the other part of the plane, and so he had to talk to me again. So he says, the Sabbath, huh? Yeah. He says, how come you go to church on a Saturday Sabbath? So I said, well, it's in the Bible. And gave him a little mini rundown of that, and he goes, I like that. You guys are right about that. So he says, what's your weird thing? I'm like, excuse me? He says, what's your weird thing? He says, every religion has a weird thing. What's yours? And I go, well, it's probably the Sabbath. Every other Christian goes to church on a Sunday, and we're going to be different, and we go on Saturday. And he goes, that's not your weird thing. That's good. That's in the Bible. I like that. That's good. What's your weird thing? So I said, well, the other part of our name, Seventh-day Adventists, we believe in the literal return of Jesus Christ. We think he's literally coming in the sky. It might seem far-fetched if that's not what you've been brought up on or studied or realized or understand about God. But we think we're going to look up one day and he's going to be in the sky, a literal return. He goes, oh, I know that's going to happen. He said, this world doesn't have much longer. Now, Jesus is coming back soon. That's not your weird thing. What's your weird thing? And I'm looking at his vodka and 7-Up that he's going through right there, and I'm like, maybe I could talk about that. Well, I stay biblical. I said, well, with Jesus coming back, there's a resurrection. So we believe that when you die, that you are asleep, you don't know anything, and that Jesus will wake you up and resurrect you when he comes. We don't believe that you go straight to heaven or that there's an eternal hell or anything. And he goes, He goes, I like that. That's good. That's not your weird thing. What's your weird thing? And I'm like, he's getting at the prophet thing. That's what he's getting at. We got a prophet. But I don't want to do that right now. So I'm like, well, that's pretty much it. That's us. Other than that, we believe the same theology as pretty much every other church. So he says, how do you join your church? So I explained baptism, the process we usually use, and he goes, I'm going to join your church. He says, can I come down to your church and join your church? And I said, sure. He says, because when Jesus comes back soon, I need my name on a roll somewhere. And I'm like, well, this is how it works. It's not about having your name on a roll. That's a very human thing. But to follow God is to live with God. And we're really having a serious Bible study at this point. The Bibles aren't open. I mean, I got a thick spiritual book, but it wasn't actual scripture. But I've been doing this for a little while, and I can go, and we can have a chat. And he's like, well, I like this. And so the only contention we have is that he wants to come down, get baptized, and go home back to San Jose. And I want him to join a church. I said, we got a bunch of Seventh-day Adventist churches in San Jose around there. We got a lot of them. I know a lot of the pastors. I'll find you a good one. And he goes, no. You're going to be my pastor. It's going to be you. And then the drink service is done. The flight attendant's back, and well, he doesn't need to talk to me anymore. Gets up out of his seat, and he goes and shows these two flight attendants his Super Bowl ring, which is why he's so huge. Now, he told me later that he has never played pro football. He did in college, but he was actually a lawyer for the 49ers, the San Francisco 49ers. And when they won the Super Bowl, 1930s, I don't know, it was a long time ago, they gave him a ring. He didn't tell the flight attendants that he was a lawyer. He went with the football player. And he's chatting with them up there, and so his seat's empty. And then one of the flight attendants who had a lot of mileage on her, and it turns out she did. She'd met somebody the night before in Denver and was going back that night to meet up with him again. She comes and sits down next to me. And she's staring at me. Now, I might have just become South Dakotan, but I've always been English. And eye contact is difficult. But she's staring at me. And I'm trying to engage. And she says, he says that you're trying to convert him. Well, we're having a chat. And she goes, don't bother. he is way past saving. Now, there have been a few moments in my life, and I've alluded to this before, and while I'm here, you'll hear the three main stories I have like this. But there are moments when you as a Christian may not know what to say, but you're going to talk anyway because somebody's talking through you. It doesn't happen automatically. You can't switch a button for that. At least I can't. But there have been a few moments in my life where I'm out of my depth. I don't really know what to say. I know what I'd want to hear, but I'm trying to work out what they need right now. And my mind's going 100 miles an hour, but my mouth is talking calmly and beautifully. And I remember saying to her, nobody is past saving for Jesus. Now, there weren't tears rolling down, but there were tears in her eyes, and we locked eyes for longer than this Englishman is comfortable with. But it was a moment, and suddenly I realized, I don't think I'm actually here for the guy. I think I'm here for the flight attendant. Because in the back of the plane were like 5 other people at the same conference I was at. Only I got to the airport first and got the first class ticket. And I thought, boy, I need to go down and pray with these guys because something's going on here. Suddenly, I don't think it's about the guy. I think it's about this woman. Nashville to Denver is not that long of a flight. And about this time, we're coming down. And the plane lands, and I give this guy my card. And we get off the plane quickly, because I'm near the front, and walk down the gangplank. And when we get to the end, he goes this way, and I go this way. And I'd love to tell you that I heard from him again, and he came down, and we had studies, and he got baptized, but that's not how the story went. I figure he went home, went on Google, and found out about our weird thing. Well, I didn't get to see him again. But it was a divine appointment. It was a plane I wasn't supposed to be on. I was sitting in first class. It's not really my thing. And I'm talking to somebody who I normally would never get to talk to. And I'm okay here, but I'm quite shy individually, and I would never have struck up a conversation with the flight attendants. I mean, that just would never have happened. But this guy, that's what he did. And so in the end, that flight attendant and I could have a conversation. I could never manufacture that. It is what I would call a divine appointment. And when you dwell on the things above rather than the things below, you might even find yourself on a plane on Sabbath, doing the Lord's work when you're trying to hide reading a spiritual book. But God knows where you are, what you're doing, who's around you, and he can put amazing things together. Which is why in our regular, mundane, routine lives, we keep trying to dwell on things above rather than things below. And in our good moments, we remember that we've died to ourselves and we've been resurrected in him. So now he's living through us. Not because I'm clever or particularly good in any kind of way whatsoever. In fact, I was doing a bunch of things I thought I shouldn't be doing. But God had control of my life in that moment. There's nothing I did. I'm not bragging up here because I didn't do it. I was busy trying to stop it. But God can do it. Now, there are still times when I'm going to blow it. There are some things about being a pastor I've got down, and there's other things about being a pastor I don't have any idea what to do. It's a broad set of gifts. And that's why we work together as a church. Because God can work through all of us in a church in a way we can't even begin to understand. but he can also work through you. When you think you're having an ordinary day, God can show up and guide you somewhere. So in your lives, pray that God will use you. He'll answer that prayer. Some of it might be really scary. You know, you might end up in some places, oh, I don't belong here. God can do that. Because God knows the end from the beginning. So the things you see as a crisis, God can be using for good. So just keep thinking on things above and not worrying about the things below. And let him lead through you.